Welcome, my name is Edith Reid. I'm the director of the Southwest Harbor Public Library. Thank you so much for being here in person, and we have a good 70 people that registered online, so thank you for joining us as well. We are mid-stride right now in our annual art auction, where you can bid now or you can bid at the end of the month. And so from art from over 50 local artists, and that's an important fundraiser for the library. We're recording the event, as you just heard. And if you're online and you have any questions, please use the chat feature and Kate will help facilitate your questions at the end of the program. Tonight, we welcome Carolyn Gage, who lives in Southwest Harbor, is the author of 85 plays. I'm not sure if that includes your newest or not.
89.
89, all right, 89. Very prolific. And Dorrit Castle, Doris Fielding Reid's great niece, who met them in 1954 on her first trip to Seawall. Judith Peller, Hallett, professor of classics and distinguished scholar, teacher emerita at the University of Maryland, College Park. And Donald Lateiner, who's the John Wright Professor of Greek Language and Literature, Emeritus of Ohio.
All right, I'm Carolyn Gage, and the way I got involved in Edith Hamilton Day was via a website I built as a pandemic project. It's called the Lesbian History Trail of Mount Desert Island. I'm also teaching that. It's not too late to register for the senior college. And Edith and Doris got on my radar because they were life partners that had summer home on the Seawall in Southwest Harbor. Her family are still in that house and they got in touch with me. So who were these women? In brief, Hamilton was a celebrated educator, headmistress of the all-female Bryn Mawr School in Baltimore from 1896 to 1922, a renowned author and best known for her books on ancient Greek and Roman literature and classical mythology. Reid, her life partner, was a pioneering female stockbroker. She also wrote a biography of Edith. From 1922 onward, the two women spent their summers at their cottage in the Seawall in Manzit. Okay, these are the four Hamilton sisters. They grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and were industrious and cosmopolitan, pursuing higher education at institutions around the world. And here they are, Nora, Alice, Margaret, and Edith, around the year 1880. Edith would have been about 13 in this photograph, and Alice, second from the left, would have been more famous, the most famous of the sisters, as the first woman on faculty of Harvard University, if Edith's books on Greek and Roman mythology had not become such runaway bestsellers. The Hamilton sisters were unusual women. They were all homeschooled and raised to take their brains and their careers seriously in an era when many middle-class women were confined to a domestic sphere. So this is Edith as a teenager. As I said, she was homeschooled, and her father taught her Latin and introduced her to the world of classical literature. She attended Miss Porter's School in Connecticut and then went on to Bryn Mawr College in Philadelphia. She knew exactly what she wanted from a very early age. She wanted a PhD in classics. But back in Indiana, her father, Montgomery Hamilton, had suffered some business disappointments and had taken to drink. Money for his children's education was running short. Edith was offered the job as headmistress of the Bryn Mawr School, which was a preparatory school for girls. It was actually a feeder school for Bryn Mawr College, her alma mater, and she accepted it instead of pursuing the doctorate that she wanted. And this is Edith during her time as headmistress of the Bryn Mawr School. Edith had met a young woman named Lucy Donnelly during her years at Bryn Mawr. Lucy was in an openly romantic relationship at college with another young woman during that time, but that ended when the young woman became engaged to be married. Edith and Lucy began to spend time together, and although Lucy did not have a romantic attachment to Edith, Edith and Lucy were primary in each other's lives for 15 years. They traveled together to Asia and more than once to Europe. They took care of each other when they were ill. This familial relationship endured until Lucy went off with the head of Bryn Mawr College on her travels in 1915. So what about before Lucy? I didn't find a record of that, but correspondence from Edith to her sister Margaret and her mother make it very clear she never had any interest in men. So let's take a look at the Reid family. This is a photograph of Harry Fielding Reid, Doris's father, that appears to have been taken in Acadia Park. I'm kind of thinking maybe Door Mountain or something. Anyway, Harry was a professor of geology at Johns Hopkins, and Edith Giddings Reid, his wife, was a prominent society hostess. In her early years as headmistress in Baltimore, Edith had met the Reid family, and Edith Reid had taken a great liking to her. So this is one of the very few photos I have of Doris. It was taken at the Seawall, and she appears to be in her 40s. I regret that I don't have any pictures of her as a child or as a young woman. The Reids had a daughter, Doris, who was enrolled in the Bryn Mawr School when she was 8. Doris was a gifted musician, and as she entered her teen years, she planned a career as a concert pianist. To that end, she left Bryn Mawr School at 16 to study at the Peabody Conservatory. Doris apparently enjoyed the company of women considerably older than herself, and she also saw an independent and artistic life as something very desirable. Her parents very much approved and actively encouraged the friendship between Doris and Edith Hamilton, and supported their plan to travel to Europe together in the summer of 1921, when Edith was 54 and Doris was 25. The Reids would eventually invite Edith to move into their Baltimore home. So did Doris become a concert pianist? No, she didn't. By 1923, she had developed a persistent injury in her wrist called a ganglion cyst. She was facing a lifetime of teaching piano, which did not interest her. So instead, she became a stockbroker, and she picked a very, I know, right? She picked a really interesting time to do that. She was hired by the New York firm Loomis Sales and Company in 1929, just 1 month. Great timing. You know, when they hire a woman, everything's about the bottom's going to go out. Just 1 month before the crash that started the Great Depression, there were only 2 other women who were stockbrokers at that time. Doris was incredibly competent, and she made vice president in an unheard of 15 years. So was the relationship between Doris and Edith romantic? Was it sexual? Let's take a look at the definition lesbian by Dr. Lillian Faderman, an American historian whose books on lesbian history and LGBT history have earned critical praise and awards. The New York Times named 3 of her books on its notable books of the year list. Dr. Faderman has been referred to as the mother of lesbian history for her groundbreaking research and writing on lesbian culture, literature, and history. This is what she has to say about the word lesbian. Lesbian describes a relationship in which 2 women's strongest emotions and affections are directed toward each other. Sexual contact may be part of the relationship to a greater or lesser degree, or it may be entirely absent. This is a definition that I rely on in my understanding of the history and culture of my community, the lesbian community. Edith and Doris lived together for 40 years until Edith's death, and they raised a legally adopted child and unofficially raised the siblings of that child. They shared 2 homes, a winter residence in New York and then Washington, as well as their summer home in Maine. It is clear they shared a room and a bed in Washington. If marriage had been legal between women, it's a pretty safe bet they would have been married. Was it romantic? Was it sexual? What we do know is it was a committed and intimate partnership that lasted for 4 decades. In 1922, Edith resigned her position at Bryn Mawr School and took her retirement. She was 54. Doris was 26 and just beginning her career. This is a portrait of Edith that was commissioned by Bryn Mawr at the time of her retirement. 1922 was a very big year for this couple. Edith resigned and also officially adopted Dorian, the son of Doris's brother, Doris's nephew. Frances Fielding Reid and Marie Magdalene Svensson Reid were the parents. Doris wanted to adopt Dorian, but it was decided that Edith would be the legal parent because Edith was more financially stable than Doris. Also, Doris had a blood tie to the child, which was an added layer of legal protection if Edith died. If Doris had been the adopting parent, Edith would have had no legal claim to the boy, even if she was the co-parent. The adoption was a bold move and a strong expression of faith in the relationship. And this part of their story points up the difficulties for same-sex couples before joint adoption was legal. Doris's parents, the Reids, had been spending summers in Seal Harbor on MDI with their extended family and their household staff. In the summer of 1922, the year of the adoption, Doris's parents purchased land at the end of Seawall Point Road in Southwest Harbor. Doris and Edith and Dorian moved to the Seawall home together and remained through the first winter. It was the only winter they spent on the island. And someone I met at a talk here, I think their grandmother had worked for the family. And she said that during that winter, every time she was touching Dorian, he crinkled. And what it was he was stuffed with newspapers because it was so cold. I think they were heating it with fireplaces, and you know how that goes. So he was stuffed in I just found that adorable. But that was the only winter they ever tried that experiment. Here's another view of the Seawall house. Daunted by the harsh Maine winter, the following fall, the small family moved to New York's Gramercy Park neighborhood. The family continued to summer at the Maine cottage for the next 4 decades. Edith and Doris also welcomed other family members into their home, and 2 of Doris's nieces, Elizabeth Fielding Reid and Mary Fielding Reid, would stay with them on and off in both in New York and at Seawall. And if you climb out on that pile of rocks there and look up, look north, you can just make out the house. It's very small and in the distance. Edith and Doris were homeschooling Dorian, and Edith began telling him the stories about the Trojan Wars and the Greek gods and goddesses. Around the same time, she was translating a Greek play that was being done in New York, where they had their winter home. Because of her theater connections, she was invited to write an article on classical theater for Theater Arts Monthly, which is a, theater trade magazine, but it's not a classical one. Needless to say, the article was intentionally non-academic. It was very popular. She was asked to write another, and these early essays became the basis of her first book, The Greek Way. The year was 1930, the height of the Depression. The book translated the classical world of academia into the popular vernacular of mainstream America. Edith was homeschooling America. The Greek Way was wildly successful and was a featured selection of the Book of the Month Club. It has remained in print for nearly a century. Edith followed this up with a string of other successful books: The Roman Way, The Prophets of Israel, Mythology, and The Echo of Greece. Mythology was published in 1942 in the middle of World War II. The book has also remained in print, and it's responsible for a number of children's books that adapted these myths for young readers. This is the 75th anniversary edition of it, published in 2017. It's never been out of print. She also wrote books about Christianity, and the first was Witness to the Truth, Christ and His Interpreters. She also wrote a book about the Old Testament, The Prophets of Israel. The 2 women remained in New York City until 1943, and then they moved to Washington, D.C., still spending their summers in Maine. This was a tough and reluctant move, but Doris had been promoted to the head of the local offices in Washington for her brokerage firm, the one she'd been with since 1929. Edith continued to write and frequently entertained friends, fellow writers, government representatives, and other dignitaries at her home. Her guests included Isaac Dinesen, out of Africa, Robert Frost, labor leader John L. Lewis. After her move to Washington, Edith became a commentator on education projects and began to receive honors for her work. She also recorded programs for television and Voice of America, traveled to Europe, and continued to write books, articles, essays, and reviews. This is a photo of their home in Washington. Edith considered the high point of her life to be a trip to Athens in 1957 at the age of 90. She traveled to Greece to hear her translation of Aeschylus's Prometheus performed at the ancient Odeon Theater. As part of the evening ceremonies, King Paul of Greece awarded the Golden Cross of the Order of Benefaction, which was Greece's highest honor. And the mayor of Athens made her an honorary citizen of the city. And this is Edith receiving her award. She gave a short speech that was very popular. This is a very blurry picture of her receiving that award. Edith died of a heart attack at their home in Washington at the age of 96. This is her at the Seawall. 4 years after the death of her partner, Doris published Edith Hamilton, an intimate portrait. That was in 1967. Doris outlived her partner by a decade, dying on January 15th, 1973. Both women were buried at Cove Cemetery in Hadley, Connecticut, along with other members of the Hamilton family. And this is a picture, nice segue, of Dr. Judith Hallett, who will be talking to us next about Edith's work.
I'm Professor Judith Hallett, and I am pleased and honored to have the opportunity to talk about Edith Hamilton, whose mythology, which I first read exactly 70 years ago in 1954, whose mythology inspired me to study and teach about Greek and Roman antiquity as my lifelong vocation. And I'm especially delighted to do so here in the great state of Maine, where I came to reside 80 years ago in May 1944 at the age of 6 weeks, when my mother came from Chicago to Biddeford to stay with her parents while my father served in the South Pacific with the U.S. Navy. My mother's father, my grandfather, Benjamin Stern, an entirely self-schooled immigrant from Lithuania via London, the first Jewish member of the Maine state legislature. This was back in 1931. My grandfather was a voracious, avid reader, and I actually first encountered Hamilton's books in his libraries as a 10-year-old. Since then, although my mother and I left Biddeford for Point South, once my father came home from the war, I've spent much time here in Maine, including summers on Deer Isle at Camp Les Chalets Français in the 1950s. And then I returned to Deer Isle again in the 1990s, not only to visit our next speaker, Donald Lateiner, and his family at their wonderful home, the former Robert McCloskey House, but also to visit Dorrit's mother, Elizabeth Betsy Reid Pfeiffer, like me, a Wellesley College alum, and I came to Seawall for the first time. And this was right after I'd begun my own research on Hamilton in connection with a larger research project on 6 outstanding North American women classicists that Don Lateiner and I got started on in 1992. It's a long time ago. So I don't know why the organizer of this project asked me to work on Edith Hamilton. Perhaps it was because I now live in the state of Maryland, Hamilton's home in the years when she headed Baltimore's Bryn Mawr School. But I leapt at the opportunity, and I did so for several reasons. She'd been my professional inspiration. Her townhouse that we just saw at 2448 Massachusetts Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C., is just a few miles away from my townhouse on Massachusetts Avenue after it crosses the D.C. line into Bethesda. And in fact, I've been to her house. It's absolutely physically identical to my townhouse. And also because I was interested in her sister Alice and Alice's fellow residents at Jane Addams's Settlement Hull House in Chicago. Classics featured prominently in the Hull House curriculum. And I've recently learned that my paternal grandmother, who was an immigrant, learned English there. But although Dawn's outstanding female classicist in this project was not Edith Hamilton, but a Vassar professor named Elizabeth Hazelton Haight, Dawn specializes in the ancient Greek world, which was Edith's favorite area, whereas I specialize in the Romans. So in many respects, you ought to listen to him. He's better equipped to assess Edith Hamilton's interpretations of classical antiquity as a whole. So, okay, what is my assessment of Hamilton's writings as a scholar? And that is holder of a PhD degree in classical philology, which is the study of ancient Greek and Latin, languages in their wider social and cultural context. And as a researcher who looks closely not only at primary sources of the written texts in their original languages, but also at the publications, the peer-reviewed publications of other classical scholars, engaging with and giving them credit for their findings, whether to agree or to take issue. So when I signed up to be a classics major at Wellesley College in 1962, and I acknowledged to my professors that reading Hamilton's mythology had originally sparked my love of classical antiquity, I was immediately cautioned and indeed reprimanded and told that Edith Hamilton was not a serious or factually responsible authority on classical antiquity. And this is an assessment I have heard on many occasions thereafter. And the factually irresponsible assessment is in fact accurate. As a classical scholar, I need to be concerned with what happened when and by and to whom and which social and cultural circumstances and how these happenings are described in Greek and Roman antiquity and how they're discussed by previous scholars. And because I'm also a researcher especially concerned with issues of gender and sexuality in antiquity, I am also very committed to taking these two categories of analysis into close account. So I'm not going to lie, consequently, I am invariably disappointed in how Hamilton presents and misrepresents ancient evidence in general, and how she ignores issues of gender and sexuality in particular. Now, like many other scholars, I view her discussions of Greek and Roman women and their conduct, especially as sexually desired and desirable and desiring individuals. I think these descriptions are significantly influenced by her lesbian identity. Yet, curiously, she never mentions the early Greek female poet Sappho of Lesbos, whose lyrics voice desire for other women. She doesn't even do it in the Roman way. And she devotes an entire chapter, for all of you who've studied Latin, to the Latin poet Catullus, who translated Sappho's lyrics into Latin, who adapted Sappho's distinctive poetic meter into Latin, and who even called his female beloved by the pseudonym Lesbia after Sappho and her native island of Lesbos. Now, of course, Hamilton fails to describe same-sex relationships in Greek mythology and in ancient historical reality, because of course, at the time she was writing and the audience for which she was writing, such discussions were pretty much taboo. But Catullus is writing about an opposite sex relationship, and she does not even explain why Catullus referred to his female beloved as Lesbia, never mentions Sappho at all. And when I read something like this, I say, Edith, you can do better than that. Come on, tell us more. And I get exasperated at Hamilton's misrepresentation of Greek plural gods as a single Christian capital G God, and at her mislabeling slaves as servants, and at her claims that fictional characters who speak in the plays of Athenian dramatists such as Aeschylus speak for and as Aeschylus himself, and at her references to the Athenians as the Greeks, as if they weren't Spartans or Thebans or Corinthians, etc. And I get very annoyed at her assumption that the Romans were inferior to the Greeks. And of course, I'm very frustrated at her obliviousness to the research and the writings of classical scholars in her own day, some of whom had important ideas and facts to share that went very well with what she was saying. But in conclusion, I would dispute this assessment of Hamilton as not serious. She was extremely serious about sharing as eloquently as possible, as lucidly as possible, her own passion for classical antiquity with a wide readership unfamiliar with the writings of Greece and Rome in the original Greek and Latin languages. And by sharing this passion, she motivated many, such as myself, who had not yet mastered those languages, but had an opportunity to do so, to go ahead and learn them. And as soon as I could study Latin, this was back in 1957, I did so. And the same went for ancient Greek. I had to wait for a few years till I got to college because it wasn't offered at my high school. So I asked myself, what would I do? Who would I be without Edith Hamilton? Whatever her scholarly shortcomings, she compensated with writings that have lasted long and come on strong, giving Greek and Roman antiquity the attention and indeed the affection that they richly deserve. Thank you both. Yeah, here. Yeah.
I really couldn't.
It's all 18.
Thank you for being here today. I'm not sure it was mentioned that this is a birthday celebration. Edith's birthday was the 12th, so 12th of August, so we're not so far off. Edith Hamilton was unique in more ways than we have time to identify here today. She was a spokesperson for classics when it had none. This bold woman scoffed at the men of the universities, but not from a position of ignorance of Greek literature and art, which she loved. She derided the work of fellow Hellenists and Latinists because she was looking for a certain kind of meaning, not syntactic oddities, which occupied many classicists at that time and still a few. What she discovered, almost accidentally, was a public that wanted to hear about a past epoch that had a message relevant to the America of her time. Classicist, grammatical, literary, and even historical scholarship were not worthwhile to her. Her Bryn Mawr advisor suggested the topic for her dissertation, the use of the genitive case in Seneca's tragedies. This strikes even classicists as funny today. And I think it was part of the reason she never completed that doctoral degree that she passionately wanted. She can be witty on arcane subjects such as the number of members in the Athenian tragic chorus, 12 or 15 by implication in Aeschylus's Agamemnon and in some ancient footnotes, but 50 in another passage of Aeschylus in the Danaids. Hamilton concludes rather breezily by objecting to the idea that Athenian geniuses had any rule or ever followed one. Philologists, however, still debate this matter with great fervor, but still indecisively. Hamilton brushes off Russian comedy and the troublesome rules of French tragedy. Her judgments appeal to her American audience. She rails against Freud and Einstein, Cubism and Faulkner. For her, such artists and movements constituted, quote, the cult of the incomprehensible. But she was Indiana born in 1867 and was proud that her opinions rarely changed. In Britain, in contrast, she was and is rarely mentioned because she appeals, especially for a reason I hope to explain, to her countrymen and women. Doris Fielding Reid's selection of her essays, The Ever-Present Past, is a good introduction to her interests, her methods, and both her modesty and her self-assurance. Reid quotes her as saying to the suitor of her writing her first book, probably John Mason Brown, quote, "What folly it would be for his firm to publish a book on Greece by an unknown writer, in no way recognized as a Greek scholar, and not even a professor in a university," end quote. When asked why she started writing many years after she was famous, she coyly responded, "I was bullied into it." This collection of essays, still in print, available in paperback, spans several decades of Hamilton's writing and reveals both Hamilton's virtues and her limitations. And sometimes I think, like Judy, who inspired me to investigate Edith Hamilton, it's very hard to separate the virtues from the limitations. Take, for instance, her fierce admiration, really adulation, of the Athenian poetic and dramatic innovations and architectural inventions such as the Parthenon and the Propylaea of the later 5th century. She repeatedly extols Athenian realizations of beauty, their originality, their enduring relevance to human projects and political thought, in marble and artistic challenges, and the Athenians' unique self-reliance, all of which probably all of us admire. But it was the Athenians who did all this, not the other Greeks, who actually disliked the Athenians for many of their achievements, including taxing and conquering them. It was the Athenian way, and why she calls it the Greek way, I'm not sure. As Hamilton states, these are some quotes from The Ever-Present Past, "The Athenians were the only free people in the world, an almost perfect democracy, that is, for men. Slaves, no one ever gave them a thought. This is untrue. They, the Athenians, loved beauty, but with simplicity," which is a quotation of Thucydides' Pericles. Thus, her most famous book, The Greek Way, in its original edition, ignored the two great historians of this narrow but important period, Herodotus from Halicarnassus and Thucydides, a homeborn writer in general. This blindness, or was it her decision, reflects her own inclination to grand pronouncements of eternal verities. Here, particularly those that Athenian tragic choruses produced. One celebrated, relatively concentrated, relatively formal literary genre, Attic tragedy, first inspired her to translate for the living stage. And this was kind of her takeoff. She never taught Greek or studied Greek among scholars after college. She repeatedly praises, and I quote, "the old verities and the truths of the heart, the old universal truths," end quote. Enjoying a confidence in her dogmatic views that most of us would be a little embarrassed to imitate. She preferred to bypass the head-bashing atrocities and mass enslavements committed by her chosen people, her Athenian faves, and her chosen hero, Pericles. But with some prodding, she added the historians to later and the current edition. More oddly, Hamilton almost never mentions Homer, an author more influential for Greek ways of doing and thinking about everything than all three Attic tragedians put together. There are many Greek ways, and all of them start from Homer. And as Judy mentioned, what about Sappho of Lesbos? Would it be wrong to think her own lifelong same-sex relationships made her shy away from lesbian Sappho's exquisite lyric celebrations of women loving women. It cannot be that she found Sappho's portraits of women disturbing or inappropriate, but she seems to have been a person who preferred to worship at one altar rather than survey the peculiar loveliness of Greece's many literary chapels. When she turned to the 4th century Greeks, post-Periclean, and later ones, she could only summon faint praise. For her, the curtain came down after Plato, and Plato claimed her attention for his celebration of the 5th century Athenian martyr to philosophy, Socrates. The brains and artists who came later, among them names you may know, such as Xenophon, Aristotle, Callimachus, Longus, Plutarch, and Lucian, were only the echo of Greece. Yes, that was her title, as if Greece and Athens had died with Socrates and only lived on in echo. In sum, I think part of Edith Hamilton's charisma is precisely her laser focus on one city's half century and that part of its literature that can be read as uplifting. Although I find the 3 Athenian tragedians more pessimistic about human capacities and divine intentions than Hamilton does. She avoids or downplays the messiness of good and bad features of Athenian democracy, such as imperialism, courts without trained judges, labor extracted from slaves and women, and she ignores Athenian minimal engineering and drafty houses. Maybe that's how she was able to live through a winter at Seawall. The glory that was Greece for her is largely tragic drama, the Athenian Acropolis, and a sanitized version of Athenian democracy without the litigation, without the demagogues, and without the hardly incidental political and financial oppression of Athens' satellite states. This bold woman burst upon the American literary scene in the 1930s and prospered in it through the early 1960s, when her ardor and her optimism and her parallels between us Americans and the ancient Athenians met an American need for validating our sudden eminence in a difficult and threatening world. Thank you for listening.
Let's see if we can get. Okay, go ahead and speak.
Hello.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. Perfect.
All
All right, thank you.
Yes. Right. That's good. This one, so you can see. Everything.
Okay.
That was one of the.
Okay.
All right, now I'm going to share it with folks. Here and. Okay. I think my business, let's make sure you're able to turn to the next one.
And click on that one.
Or I think you should be able to go back and forth.
This will probably be easier, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Dorrit Castle. I like to call myself Edith Hamilton's great niece, even though I was really her life partner, Doris Fielding Reid's great niece. But I knew her from the time of my birth. I guess I was 1 when I met her.
until 1963 when she passed and I was 14. And was just so incredibly fortunate to know this wonderful, fantastic woman. Who, of course, I didn't realize it when I was 14 years old, but now looking back, you know, I just thank my lucky stars that I was part of her life and she was part of our family. So in my short presentation of family photographs, I'd like to share pictures of Edith that are from albums that Doris mainly took. The pictures start in the 1920s and go until Edith's passing in 1963. And through these photographs, I'll share snapshots of Edith's daily life, how she filled her days and evenings. Some of the photos are of people that I'm not able to identify, but I'm showing them because they give a sense of who she was as a person, how she hung out, who she interacted with when she was with her friends and our family. This first photo shows a picture of Edith, I think you've seen it before, as the headmistress at Bryn Mawr School. It was taken in 1916. This is likely a publicity photo taken of Edith when she began her writing career with her first book, The Greek Way, in 1930. This is probably from the early 60s in the sun porch at our house on Seawall Point. My remembrance of her during summers in Maine are of her spending her days here, reading, writing, conversing, or just looking out at the waves crashing onto the rocks, which were literally about 20 feet from where she was sitting. Now I'm speculating about this photo because this is the house that I own now on Seawall Point, having been passed down to me through 3 generations. But this house started its location on the Seawall Road up at a quarter of a mile from where it is now. This house was owned by Peter Benson, and it was picked up and rolled down to its present place on Seawall Point on huge logs pulled by a yoke of oxen. I recognize the distinct details on the house. You can see right up here, the peaked window that's on the attic, which is there still. And when my sister built her house on the adjacent plot, she put those lovely windows on her house. The front door is the same and with the roof line. The facade of the house was changed and bedrooms were added to the upstairs after it was sited down at the point. This is the picture, these are pictures of Edith when she spent the winter at Seawall Point. You see the house is different already. This is one of the additions and the other one you can't really see. But there's Edith, and in the picture on the left, she's got Dorian with her. And Edith had many, many animals. They were always part of her life. She loved them dearly. The dog was named Peter. And the cat was named the White Emperor. So you can just imagine who that cat was. This is the house after the addition of the wings. This was probably taken during the 1940s. You notice right here, this is the pump house and this was our water supply before we had town water. So this picture shows a motor trip to Eastport, Maine. Whenever they went into any place in the car, it was called motoring, not driving or going for a drive or anything. And it probably was during the late 1920s. And Doris captioned this photo in the album, "Dorian changes the tire while Pa smokes." This big Pa, and there's his pipe. So Doris's father, Pa, the name that he was given by his grandchildren was Dear Man, and that's what they called him. Mom always referred to him as Dear Man, and it was just, I thought, such a lovely title and an honor. So this is a picture of the same trip, and Doris is rearing and ready to go in the car, hands on the wheel. And up on the porch, right up there, Doris wrote in the caption. Doris, Edith sitting on the porch translating Agamemnon during the tire change. So this is at the Seawall house already, and you can see in this picture the work that they're doing when they're siting it. The timbers that are holding up the roof and all the stones. The house was plopped down on a piece of ledge that was right on the point. There's no basement, there's no central heat. There's basically no heat at all, but and they must have built it on, stacked railroad ties to prop it up, and then they got stones from the shoreline, and that's how they built the foundation all around the house. And you can see the accumulation of stones there that they collected. This is White Emperor and Peter the dog having a romp in front of the Seawall house. So it seems like these animals went with Edith and Doris any place they went. These are some more of the animals that Edith loved. My mother always talked about this dog, the Black Newfoundland. His name was Don. And the two white kitties are named Snowball and Snowman. And there's Peter right next to them. And this is the picture I love of Doris. I think she just looks so beautiful standing there with her iconic hairstyle. She always wore her hair in that short cropped kind of brush back. With the pops as they were, you could see a little older. This man I don't know in the photograph on the left, but I just love Edith's pose, and that's kind of how she was, full of ideas, making important points, conversing about almost anything. There's a picture of Edith and Don, and if you notice her hearing aid from those early days, what I remember as a child is she wore a pendant around her neck, which had a little box, which it was the actual hearing aid. And that box emitted loud squeaking and static noises all the time, and Edith was constantly having to adjust it. So her loss of hearing became more and more of a handicap for her, but she certainly managed. The rocks down in front of the Seawall house have just played such a huge part in my life and my cousins' lives. It's always where we went and where we hung out and had fun playing, and I'm sure that grown-ups were happy to, let us go down there even when we were 5 years old and really not really supervised. But there they are. There's Edith, and that's Dorian. And Edith has Peter the dog, and there's one of the white cats, Snowman or Snowball. There's the other, and there's Don, got his eyes on the cat. So this picture isn't at Seawall, but it shows a picture of Edith holding a pony that my mother is riding, and just another example of how much she loved animals. Edith must have been ill in this picture because the clock on her bedside table says 10 minutes to 12, and I never ever remember her sleeping late. So anyhow, here's Edith reading to Dorian, and it looks like the White Emperor is right there, and there's Peter. Oh, that's one thing in this picture. So Edith actually had written this as her handwriting, which was difficult to read. And we weren't quite sure what it was, so we made a blow up of it. And if anybody can tell me whether that says lonely or lovely.
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 Yes.
All right, my lovely embittered old age. Embittered?
And battle.
In battle?
What about in battle?
Well, it looks like a dot over an I, but anyhow.
It's all ironic. She wasn't lonely.
No, she wasn't lonely at all, and she also, going back to this picture, she wasn't that old then either, her hair wasn't gray. Yeah, Dorian was 5 years old, so this picture would have been 1923. How old was she, 23 then? 56. So, There's another, Doris had this way of posing for pictures. I don't know whether somebody directed her to pose this way. But there she is sitting on the front door scoop. These big stones that make up our front porch were brought up from the rocks and they're still there. We've had to have the porch rebuilt, but still they're there, and it's quite a big step to hoist yourself up there. Doris always had a cigarette in her hand, always was smoking. And the brand of cigarette that she smoked was called King Sano. And we were told that they were the healthiest cigarette that she was smoking. So anyhow, there was a lot, everybody smoked in those days though, so, except for Edith, she never saw her with a cigarette. But anyhow, so we were, 10, 12 years old, and because Doris smoked so much, she couldn't keep track of how many cigarette packets she had anywhere in the house, so we would swipe them, go down on the rocks and smoke away. And I remember I was the bossiest big sister that ever was, and my younger sister, Bethy, I wouldn't let her have a cigarette unless she inhaled. Not a proud moment, but there you have it. These pictures of Edith and Doris were really interesting to me. Starting with the picture on the left, this is taken in front of the front door of the Seawall house, and they have their arms around each other. And I never saw any physical affection between the two of them. This picture, they're holding hands. Somebody's conversing about something. They were always incredibly kind to each other and patient and lovely, but it wasn't an affectionate, physical relationship as far as we knew. And I don't know, that was just from observation. So this picture was my mother and father's wedding. This is at their Washington, D.C. house in 1946, the one that Carolyn showed you the picture of. I just found this very amusing because there they are toasting the bride and the groom. This is my mother right there and my father with a mustache. And Doris and Edith are toasting, but they're not looking at the bride and groom, they're looking at each other. And this is Doris's mother, Edith Giddings Reid, so my mother's grandmother, and this is Mary Harris, who was, she was a former Latin teacher at Bryn Mawr. And she and Doris, she was kind of Doris's chaperone when Doris went to Berlin to study piano, after she was at the Peabody Institute. And I have to say, Edith and Doris, they basically brought my mother up as they did all the children in the Reid family, even though only Dorian was legally adopted. And then my father came into my mother's life, and Edith and Doris were not happy. He was 20 years older than my mother, a young 20 years older. But I just can imagine the communication between Edith and Doris and saying, what is our dear Betsy getting herself into?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Does she have a hearing aid and the other woman has a hearing aid too?
I think this is an earring.
No,
This one, yeah, yes, that's, I can just pick up over there. That's Edith Giddings Reid, who is Doris's mother, my mother's grandmother. And I guess she did have a hearing aid as well. Yeah, maybe that's where I got my hearing loss. This picture, so Doris and Edith, as I said, they moved to Washington, D.C., where Doris opened the financial firm Loomis Sales office and was promoted to vice president there. This photo is from late spring 1948. This is my brother George, who was born in February of 1948. My mother was living with Edith and Doris in Washington, D.C. when she gave birth to my brother. My father was a naval architect, and he had gone to Japan to work for the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. And so he actually didn't meet my brother until my brother was about 5 months old. So, but you notice see that Doris's hairstyle, the same, never changed. So after we came back from Japan, we went to Edith and Doris's house for our first Christmas, my second Christmas. I was about 14 months old then. I have a great nephew here. If my younger nephew would like to hold him up, this is Ronan McNay. And Ronan was born on my birthday, October 1st in 2022. Wow. Oh, boy. Okay. So anyhow, this is Mammy, which that's what Mom called her grandmother. Doris called Edith Ma and Pa. So. This is in the Washington DC home with the ever-present, animal. And this is how Edith would spend her evenings. And this is another picture of Edith working in her Washington DC home. If you notice the ice axe just to the left of her desk, that belonged to Doris's father, my great-grandfather, Harry Fielding Reid. And as Carolyn said, he was a geologist at Johns Hopkins. And one of the many things he did was he developed the elastic rebound theory. And that was he studied the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. And that's when he developed that theory. And the science behind this theory has helped us for more than a century and is still used today in our understanding of earthquakes. Yeah. So this is Edith during one of her soirees at the Washington DC house. And if anyone remembers how Robert Frost looked, he spoke at, I think, JFK's inauguration. Edith was invited also to JFK's inauguration. Was she invited to speak? Not to speak, just to attend. But it was really, really cold and they decided not to go. So, and this is a picture of Edith at one of her evening get-togethers. The woman is Francesca Palmer. She was one of Edith and Doris's friends when they were living in Gramercy Park in New York City. And I just got a kick out of this photograph because there's Doris photographing and somebody is photographing Doris photographing. Yeah. Francesca, and she had a sister whose name was Rosamond Gilder. Anything I need to know about my family, Judy knows. Francesca and Rosamond accompanied Edith and Doris on 3 different trips to Europe from 1956 to 60. So they were very, very close friends. So this is Edith right in the foreground with Francesca Palmer and Huntington Cairns, who was the Secretary Treasurer and General Counsel of the National Gallery of Art in DC. And what I read about him was he visited Edith nearly every Sunday evening for more than 20 years. And so he was a Washington DC fixture, and when Doris and Edith moved to Washington DC, he introduced them to his social circle where they made many, many lifelong friends. Here's a picture of Huntington reading to Edith, and my son and I were trying to decipher the caption, but we think Doris wrote that Huntington was reading William Wordsworth to Edith.
Why was he reading it to her?
Not reciting it?
Well, no, but why was he reading it as opposed to discussing it or? Because she had trouble hearing.
Yeah, but if you were right on face to face with her, you could communicate. I think that's just what they did. They would read to each other a lot.
Didn't have televisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the house in Seawall Point didn't get a television until one summer, one of the college girls that they brought to cook for them and clean the house, she rented a television and we kids were there all the time. So this is a picture of Edith with Dr. D.T. Suzuki. He was a scholar and author who was responsible for spreading the interest in Zen to the West. And I just thought it was very interesting that Doris captioned this photo as an evening discussion about swords and Zen. Kind of don't really go together, but there you have it. So it looked like Dr. Suzuki visited more than once. As far as I know, was an attendant of his. There's Edith with one of her beloved pets. So these two pictures were taken Christmas Eve of 1957. They were at their Washington, DC home. Doris captioned both these pictures. The one on the left of Edith, she captioned an invincible force. The picture of her on the right, she captioned an immovable object. I'm not quite sure how she came up with that, but I don't know. I thought she looked really beautiful in that red silk dress. So I like this picture because at 90+ years of age, Edith was on all fours on the floor, rummaging through a bottom desk drawer. So, I mean, frequently at that age, people can't get themselves up off the floor. So. Edith loved flowers. This was their garden at their Washington, DC home. And just as she loved animals, she loved flowers, and frequently her visiting guests would bring her a bouquet of flowers, which were frequently immortalized by Doris taking a picture of them. This was spring, not spring, of course, because they weren't there in the spring, but early summer at the Seawall house. And this was before any of the renovations that my mother did were made to it. You can see those windows that went out, and I remember they were held open by a large hook and eye. It's about that long. But these were Edith's bluebells, and we were sternly warned not to pick them or step on them. Yeah. And this is the one, just kind of a memory I have of Edith. She would be down on the rocks. She would walk down there herself, and it looks like she had a walking stick at this point. Here's another one of Edith, and I remember this dog, Vicky, sat down there on the rocks and just was. There's a picture of Edith. She was cutting flowers in the meadow at Seawall, and she's got a basket where she's going to put them in. So this would have been 1954, which was the first year that we came here. And it was Edith's birthday, and we always celebrated her birthday because it was August 12th. Bethy and I, this is my sister Beth, this little boy's grandmother and Andrew's mom, with Edith, cutting the cake, and we were quite zeroed in on that cake. And this is a picture, this is me, I was 4 at the time. And what I love about that is I'm holding Edith's hand as she's holding on to me in her chair. This is Edith with her good friend Ellie Onestad, who was a frequent visitor both in DC and Seawall. Edith knew him through W.W. Norton, who was the publisher of all of her books except for mythology. So I knew Ellen, and can't say it was really, have that much in common in those days, but he was a person who was around a lot. And this is a picture. Ellen, I think he was a gay man because there was never a woman in his life. He had a house on God Island where he would just be in solitude for most of the summer. And you can see the house was sort of plopped down on some supports of timber, possibly, and rocks. And Edith, even in her old age, would manage to get on a boat and go out to this island, to Elling's house. I don't know who that man is, but obviously it was a place where they met up. This is the same kind of soirees occurred at the Seawall house during the summer as in the Washington, DC house. Lots of talking and a lot of drinking, and Edith being the only one without a cigarette. So, and there's Edith, not a young woman, but she got on that boat and off they went someplace. To me, that looks like Northeast Harbor. So, And here's a picture of Edith and Doris, and it was taken at the Seawall House because this is a room my husband and I now sleep in, the sleeping porch, which has windows to the south and the east. And if you have the windows open at night, which I like, we hear the lobster boats going out at 4 a.m. every morning. So Edith, this is her birthday, and she was given 2 kittens by Maura's mom, Mary, for her birthday, and the kittens' names were Nip and Tuck. And even though the kittens were an unexpected gift, and you don't usually just give an animal to somebody without checking with them, asking first if it's all right. But they were an unexpected gift, but Edith and Doris seemed thrilled and ready to add them to the family. Now there's a picture, which is Doris with her cigarette, of course, but my son helped me put together this slideshow, and he titled this one, Babysitting 1950s Style. This is my cousin Laura. Can you say hi to everybody? Right there. Yeah. And she's, to me, she's kind of looking like, what the heck? Yeah. So. And this was just a picture of us on the sun porch. It was, again, the first summer we were there in 1954. And my brother, my sister Beth, and me. I don't know if you can see my sister's bangs, but they're very short. And I had just cut them with some blunt end children's scissors. And I had cut them really short, like right up there. This is a picture sitting outside our sun porch at the Seawall House. There's Edith behind Doris, you can see. I believe that's Mary Harris when she was quite a bit older. Not sure who the other person is. The man is Sir George Thompson, who was a very good friend of Edith and Doris. And he spent a lot of his years trying to convince Doris to marry him, but Doris would have none of it. But he was very, very devoted to her and was actually at her bedside when she passed away in 1973. He won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1937. And I'll tell you for what. Demonstrating that electrons undergo diffraction, a behavior peculiar to waves that is widely exploited in determining the atomic structure of solids and liquids. No. Oops, I forgot my, sorry. Okay, this picture does not have Edith and Doris in it, but I just thought people who are familiar with the Causeway Club would get a kick out of it, because Edith and Doris would take out a membership for all of the children of the Causeway Club, and there we all are. And what year were you born, Maura?
56.
Okay, so you were probably, this is probably 57. Because you were probably about a year old. So this was the Causeway Club when the pool was that tide pool. Yeah, that was surrounded by big granite blocks, and the tide would go in and out. And sometimes there would be a deep end pool and sometimes not. Yeah. And cold. And cold, very cold. Yeah, yeah. So this is my cousin Harry. This is his sister Alice. This is my brother George. That's me in the back doing something for Ian's hair.
That's cool.
This is my sister Beth. This is my cousin Brooke. This is my cousin Laura, who's here, and this is my cousin Ian. And these were all the great nephews and great nieces. This picture was the 1957 departure to Athens, where Edith was presented with the key to the city and made an honorary citizen. I just got a kick out of how smartly dressed they were for their sea voyage on the ship to Greece, the SS Queen Frederica. This was a typical daily scene from my summers in Maine. Edith and Doris would sit on the sun porch pretty much all day. They would have martinis at noon, lunch at 1. They would have tea at 4, martinis at 5, and then dinners at 7. So, yeah, gin martinis, shaken, no ice. Yeah. And then this is the last picture that I'm going to share with you. I just thought it was a really nice family portrait. And it reminded me how much you know, I owe to Edith and Doris. They provided the foundation of our family's love of the Rocky Coast of Maine and the house at Seawall Point. It's been part of my tradition for 70 years, and my two grandsons now are the 6th generation, as is that little guy over there, to enjoy the beauty and grandeur of this very special place that was provided to us by Edith and Doris.
It's still on.
It's on. Now I turned it off.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention 3 books about Edith, if you're interested in finding more about her. This is the most recent book that was written about her, a biography by a woman named Victoria Houseman. It's called The Life and Loves of Edith Hamilton. I don't know about that title, but anyhow, there you go. If you read it, you could ask me any questions about the family life. You could ask Judy or Don or Carolyn questions about the academic life. Quite a few mistakes in it, but anyhow, so it goes. This book to me is really the definitive book on Edith Hamilton. It's called Alice Hamilton, A Life and Letters. This was Edith's younger sister, who was the first woman on the staff at Harvard Medical School, and did a lot of really important early work in coal mine disease. Also worked at Hull House and was just an incredible social force in this country. But this book is many letters and also descriptions of the letters by this brilliant author, Barbara Sickerman. But among the Hamilton sisters and extended family and friends, this is an amazing book. It's still in print. You can get it available. You could get it on Amazon. And this book is it's here at the library. This book is also going to be at the library because they didn't have a copy. We're going to leave this. You have Houseman's book, right? Okay. So this is the book that Doris wrote about Edith, and it just is kind of ironic. She entitled it an intimate portrait, and I can say this because I'm part of the family. It's not really an intimate portrait. Yeah, it's kind of it's just a kind of a joyful celebration of Edith's life and what Edith did, and it's nice that Edith looked back that way and remembered her. So anyhow, these are 3 good books about Edith. Okay, thank you very much.